The Marching Roundtable is proud to be an official media partner of Drum Corps International.
DCI Rewatch. On this episode, Shane Gwaltney of Music City Mystique and two friends discuss 1994 Blue Devils' My Spanish Heart.
I just think that the historical significance of this show, especially for the Blue Devils, is just astonishing to me. Like, this was such a seismic shift, I think, in the Blue Devils. And I loved the Blue Devils before this too, you know, but it was like, this just felt so different. And you look, if you look at that show, there's not a huge difference in the look of that drum corps today as in this show, you know. I mean, the uniform is close to what it was in that, you know, the way they move. And I just remember sitting there Saturday night, and if you were there, there's that, people talk about it, but it's true. There was like that, like almost fog in the stadium that night. And I remember seeing them come out on the field in that like misty fog. And it was like, that blue was unlike anything I'd ever seen in my life.
What impressed me most about that drum line is just how hard they hit. They played those drums. They didn't feather tap at all. When they played the drum, they played the drum. Now, granted, yes, that horn line's loud, and I know from a balance standpoint, they probably needed to at some time. But that in itself, that aggressiveness was part of the effect of what that drumline was throughout the whole show.
The Marching Roundtable presents DCI Rewatch. A group of friends watch one of their favorite shows, talk about why it's rewatchable, how it's held up over the years, the most rewatchable moment for each section, and how it might be different if produced today. If you'd like to talk about your favorite show, contact Tim at marchingroundtable.com. DCI Rewatch is sponsored by Fred J. Miller Incorporated, found at fjminc.com.
Hey everybody, this is Tim Hinton, the Beast of the Marching Arts. Thanks for being here for DCI Rewatch. Shane Gwaltney, you are the man of the hour. You have put a team together. Who have you got here on the podcast with you tonight?
I've got Noah Bellamy with me. Good friends, good friend of mine that we've definitely been hanging out for years, and definitely we like a lot of the same things. You know, we've grown up together, kind of competing with each other, and kind of growing up stylistically apart, but together at the same sense. And I think we have a lot of taste and it'd be a good conversation to have. And then Don Click, of course, known him for many, 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 many moons, decades now, and mentor, friend, whatnot. And the reason why I picked these guys was because Noah was a fan at the same age, about the same age, and the drum corps was impacting us, I think, about the same time. So it impacted us a little bit differently. And Don, of course, marched there and has that kind of connection and kind of seen or watched how Blue Devils evolved, over the years up until that year that we wanted to do. So
very cool.
Yeah.
So Noah, how are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you.
Man, thank you.
I'm excited.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Don Click, how are you, Don?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm really excited to talk about this show because this is probably one of my favorite shows in the history of DCI. So this is pretty exciting.
Oh, fantastic. I think a lot of people, when they think of Blue Devils, think of this show. We're talking about, of course, Blue Devils 94, My Spanish Heart, a year the Blue Devils won, of course, the championship. And Shane, of course, Music City Mystique, you guys are getting rolling already.
Yeah, I think everybody's getting rolling sooner and sooner every year, trying to out early each other, it seems like. But yeah, we're definitely up and moving for sure.
Wonderful. And Noah, we were talking before we started. I'm excited that you're going to be on the team at Madison Scouts this summer. Are you excited about that?
Super excited. Yeah, we've done some, early season planning like everyone else has, and it's the team's really clicking. And it's just fun. It's a lot of fun. We've been having a lot of fun, and I always think that usually yields pretty neat products. So we're excited.
Yeah, very excited about it too. Don Click, you're sort of a legend. Like, you've worked with so many high profile groups. Like, what would be your main gig right now, or how would I describe you? I feel like I've got too many things to mention.
Well, I do a lot of things. I do a lot of indoor groups. My big high school down here in Houston's Clearbrook High School, which this is my, I think, 12th or 13th year there. And so we're going back to Dayton again, and I'm excited about that. Of course, always involved with Mystique in one way or the other. And then, of course, during the summer, I do all the programming for the Colts Drum Corps. So we are, just like Noah was talking about, we are in full swing. Had a few little staff changes over the right after finals, so we're trying to learn each other and throwing everything out there, and it's been very interesting and fun at the same time, just kind of learning how everybody works and putting all that together. And then in the fall, I do several high schools as well down here in Houston, and then just like I said, my involvement with WGI, both from a organization standpoint with the board and then just teaching and doing all that good stuff.
Awesome. So Don, you marched Blue Devil, so you're sort of our Blue Devil authority tonight, I guess. What years did you march?
I just marched one year. I marched in 1989, which was the all black year. So that's how people kind of remember us. We were the only the only Blue Devil corps that didn't wear a lick of blue. I had blue underwear on though, so maybe that helped.
Okay. You heard it here first, people. I think that totally counts. All right, awesome. So, 1994, Everybody Loves My Spanish Heart. Of course, the Chick Corea album that came out in 1976, jazz fusion album. And of course, the Devils played a lot of Chick Corea over the years, very famously. The music in the show is Spanish Fantasy Part 1, Night Streets, Day Dance, My Spanish Heart, of course, the ballad, and then Spanish Fantasy Part 2. So, Shane, I guess the first question is, you chose the show. Why Blue Devils 94?
Yeah, man. The show 94 came around at the time when I just graduated high school. I was fresh on the scene, eager to learn everything. I had been watching drum corps for probably, maybe 3 years prior to that. So still pretty fresh. But yeah, when Blue Devils came around, for me, it was such a distinct change from everything that had been seen before for me. And it just had an awesome vibe to it. And it's just one of those things that really stuck out. Of course, he had all the cool monkey drumming and stuff in it. And, there was just a lot of iconic elements, I think, in that show that you don't realize until now, clearly, that, they were able to kind of stick around for as long as they were. But, yeah, I mean, clearly they did good that year. So.
I think, very iconic show. So why is the show rewatchable? Why would you want to watch this show now all these years later? Let's all start there. Anybody can jump in. What do you think makes this show rewatchable, makes it a show that we all want to talk about years later?
I think it had some fundamental effects in it that I think people can still be inspired by. I think even as designers, or even people that want to watch something and have any kind of nostalgia, you want to watch drum corps that's still great but still relevant to kind of what you're doing right now currently. I think Blue Devils is a great representation of that. The music was great. A lot of drum corps don't play that kind of music anymore, for sure, as far as with that kind of technicality in it for that long periods of time with full ensemble situations. Just people don't take that kind of risk musically anymore, I don't think. So that part of it's enjoyable to go back and watch and listen to, for sure.
That's for me that there's so many things about this show, and I guess I'm probably a year younger than Shane. This would have been the summer before my senior year, and for me, I remember my parents and I, we took a vacation to Boston just so that we could go to DCI finals that year because they knew how much I enjoyed drum corps, and I was an only child, so we did things like that, and it was great. So I actually got to see that show live a couple of times throughout the year, but I did get to see it Saturday night in DCI finals too, which was super spectacular. One of the things that I think makes it so rewatchable is the music. I mean, we talk about, as a youngster in high school, there's a lot of really great literature that I know is great literature now that I got introduced to from drum corps, and a lot of that was classical literature from Phantom Regiment and those shows. And for me, when I heard the Blue Devils this year, I was so enamored with the music. And then that drove me to find out who Chick Corea was. And I started to listen to a lot of that music, and I got turned on to a lot of that, which took a big part of my life, my education there, because I went to Centerville. So I was into jazz, and I ended up going to college and majoring in jazz performance. And a lot of that, was wasn't because of that Blue Devil show, but that turned me on to a lot of this like whole nother style of music and whole nother genre of jazz that I wasn't super familiar with before this show. I mean, the music is phenomenal, and it still is. It still is. It's great.
So this was your introduction to Chick Corea?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
How about you, Don?
Well, for me, I think it was a lot of things. Like I said, I aged out in '89, so this was 5 years after my age out. Drum corps was kind of going through a change in the '90s. It was going from just playing 4 tunes, your production number and all that, just to all of a sudden the corps are starting to put together a few more thoughts as far as a production. And so this show kind of took that to the next level because it was all Spanish. But like you said, the music was phenomenal. But also remember, this was the year that Blue Devils changed their uniform. So they went from the tuxedo looking jacket to all of a sudden this flashy new age looking thing. And this was Scott Johnson's first year back after he had been at Vanguard. So the whole drumming thing was totally new and totally different. Everybody was real wristy, with their drumming and real contained. And all of a sudden this drum line came out just on fire and just, like Shane said, the monkey drumming and just all of the intensity and the pit playing all the hand drums to go with that Spanish sound. I think it was a combination of all of those things that show, you look at it and it was like, holy crap, this is something totally new, totally different, and in your face drum corps, and everybody just liked it. And I think a lot of times people look back, and not saying you have to appreciate the old school to not appreciate the new school, but that was just drum corps in your face. I mean, you look at times where that horn line would just rush to the front sidelines and blow your face off. The drum line's doing all this monkey drumming, and then the color guard is just, just the typical Blue Devils color guard. It was so just very sensual without being, over the edge. It was all the couple work. It was just phenomenal. Everything, top to bottom, was just so sophisticated and yet at the same time ultra raw. And I think sometimes drum corps nowadays is so in line that you miss that rawness. It's overly produced to where, like I said, just the rawness of that horn line and that drum line, that color guard it's something that you don't necessarily see today. So a lot of people still appreciate it because it's of what it was and what it is.
Well, and I think it's, sorry, Shane, I think it's exactly what you said. One of the things that I think makes this year so special is when you put it in its place where it was, like what came before it. This is such a radical change for that drum corps, from the uniforms. And I think this was Todd Ryan's first year too, wasn't it? Like they just moved differently. They looked differently. It's shocking when you think of the Don Ellis stuff that came in '93, and then you go to this drum corps this year. It just feels like a totally different. It feels like a production. It was to me. It's like one of those first years that it felt like a total production. And with the guard and all that, the costuming, which was very much like Bolero. When San Jose did Bolero, it was like it's that same sort of like look and feel, and it was so impactful to me seeing it in person, and I think a lot of that had to do with what the Blue Devils were leading up to that moment, and seeing them come out, it was just like, holy cow, this is a thing. This is different. It's amazing. It's amazing.
And it smacked you in the face at every turn. Every phrase, everything of that show would just pop you in the face. Even when you got to, okay, this is a nice ballad. Well, all of a sudden they turned that soprano soloist around, facing backfield and just screaming. Wasn't pinched off. It was still that beautiful open sound, but just in the stratosphere. And then, hey, we're going to flip him around and have it echo off the back. Phenomenal. Unreal. Every phrase was amazing.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because that was really a special effect in the show, was that super high screaming trumpet going off the back corner. I don't know who had that idea, but that is really a memorable moment from the show, no doubt about it.
Yeah, the thing that captured me right from the very beginning, and if you think about it, you didn't have sound design back then, but people rely so much on that nowadays. When you go back and think about all the stuff they opened up the show with, acoustically to really set that tone. I think there's a lot of lessons, I think, still to be learned from that, of like what they did to create that emotion and vibe. And of course, the great look that they had, the bold look that they had from the years prior, I mean, really set a precedent of like how uniforms should be put on somebody to make them look 2 foot taller, you know, and have stronger lines. I mean, that basically became the mold of uniforms today still.
Yeah. Still, yeah.
So yeah, that's still 25 years later. That is B flat. You know, that is where everybody comes back to still. So yeah, kudos.
Well, Don, I want to point out, you said, you know, there's something like really, really drum core about this show. You know, like it's super aggressive. It's in your face. Like you said, all those pop smacks in the face, but that's what I think a lot of people fell in love with drum corps about, you know, and sometimes people, like you said, sort of miss it. So was it just in the aggressive design, the programming, the performance? Why is it so drum corps?
Me personally, I think it was a little bit of both. I think from the design, they allowed the performers just to open up, you know, and they gave them those opportunities to do that, like the whole monkey drumming thing. That was written that way to produce that effect. And then the performers themselves just let it loose. You know, Shane was talking about all the stuff in the pit. Is it perfectly in time all the time? No, it's not. It's very rounded, kind of like Spanish music is. So it had that certain energy to it, to where it wasn't sterile. It was like I said, it was just so energetic from a performer standpoint. You know, that corps knocks it out of the park every year, but for some reason that particular show just kind of let them be raw, and sometimes you just like that as an audience. You just want to be entertained, and that show was entertaining at every turn. Yeah. Still is.
Okay, so 3 times now we've talked about monkey drumming. So I think we need to define our terms. I'm not a drummer. I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Who wants to explain that? Let's talk about that for a minute.
It was just visual volume. You know, I think it was around that time when drummers started to realize, hey, you know, besides the color guard, we are a visual element on the field also. And I think they really utilized that, I think, more so than anybody else at the time, and kind of took advantage of, you know, a lot of white sticks moving against, you know, uniforms and things like that. So, and the way they did it is like everybody had a separate part, and it was just simple 8 notes, but everybody had a split part, but it was just one continuous rhythm that was, you know, that lined up. And it's just effect. It's the most unmusical thing in the world, but it was strictly a visual effect that set something up, you know. But it was great, and not a lot of people did that since then, really. Anything of that iconic level that is repeated like that as much as it was. Because when that thing came out, it was like for the next 10 years, somebody had that in their drum break. I mean, you would go to a band contest, 20 bands there, 10 of them had that in their drum break somewhere. Just arbitrarily, at the end of a phrase, boom, there it was, you know. It didn't mean anything, but they were the Blue Devils for sure.
So again, what I was saying earlier, before leading up to that, drumming is a lot of the wrist. So even with quote visuals that you would see, it would always be right in front of your body. It would be right over the drum head. It was all about your wrist. Very rarely did people use their entire arm, and that drum line would play with their entire arm. They got their big muscles involved, not just their wrist muscles and forearms, but their entire body was involved, especially their back muscles. So they would like bring the sticks way over their head and huge double stop rim shots, you know, which people just weren't doing at that time. So that monkey drumming where their wrists were actually coming up to their eyeballs, you know, that type of thing just wasn't popular up until that drum corps. Up until that particular year. There were a couple people kind of dabbling in it, but everybody was still very contained. And that was the first time that kind of let it loose.
So it really was a game changer for marching percussion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 100%.
I'm not a drummer, but I also always remember that, like, the long extended snare roll during the horn hits, that super loud, like, roll that's just like it's so in your face, you know. It's the same sort of thing. Like, it wasn't a tasty little roll. It was like full out.
Yeah, it was bonsai for sure.
Awesome.
It was great.
And it's one of those two that, like, I mean, it's as a kid at that point, like, I didn't care or know about clarity, you know, but it was like, it didn't matter. Like, it was just so energetic. It was like, that's amazing. And I don't know if it was clean or not. Like, I still don't even like remember if it was clean or not. Sure, it was just fine. But you sit there and it's like, it was a vibe. It was like what you were saying, Don. It's like, it's just the nature of the music. It's a vibe, and it's all about energy. You know, it's all dance music. It's all celebrational music. It's this stuff that just excites you and fills you with energy. And to arrange that and to pull that off, because we've seen or been involved in plenty of like loud shows on a football field, and they're usually brutal, you know. So the fact that they were able to do what they did with that music, and it didn't come across as like contrived or cheesy or anything. It was so authentic and energetic. It was really amazing. It's really, really amazing.
Yeah, the Blue Devils are pretty much the king at writing to effect. And not really, I mean, yeah, they got their nuances in the percussion writing of like the skill set for the players, but the big picture, they always know like the macro effect that everybody needs to know and hear. And you know, foreign players like Noah even gets it, you know?
Right. Well, they do that visually. Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, Don.
No, I was about to say they do that visually as well, like the slow motion section. That was hugely effective because they were marching slow motion, but they had the guts to turn and face the end zone so you could see every little thing in their leg, in their ankle, in their foot, and they were doing that slow motion. And the battery, of course, is weaving through that at single time. The horn line's doing it at, I think it was less than halftime, like 1/4 time, and then you've got the sparkle from the uniforms as that's all sparkling, and then it was just, those are the types of things that, you know, the grandmas in the audience love, as well as people like us that are deep into drum corps. It's just very, very effective. They do that sort of thing so well, and like I said, there were many of those moments in the show, visually as well, rushing the front sideline. They did that a couple times. You know, the drumline did it at the end of the opener, kind of putting that exclamation point at the end of the opener. And then the whole corps did it at the end of the show, or the end of the music portion of the show. The whole corps rushed the front sidelines. I mean, and they were just playing their guts out. And, man, talk about something that's entertaining for the audience, you know?
Yeah. And this is like when I went to music school, I remember I didn't have a whole lot of friends that marched drum corps or even knew a whole lot about drum corps, because back then there was, you know, because it was bugles, wasn't always a whole lot of like music students that were doing drum corps all the time. So I remember that in the jazz program, I would play this for them, like as a dude, you got to check this out, like to hear what they did. And it was always, everyone always loved it. You know, it was super accessible even to people who had no idea, like you were saying, Don, about the activity. They would listen to this and be like, wow, that's amazing. Like, that's awesome, you know? And you can't say that about every drum corps show, for sure. So there's something really great about that.
You know, Don, you mentioned the slow motion thing. I put that down as my most rewatchable or my favorite visual moment, just because I thought it was so unique. And especially as you described, the corps members are moving so super slow. And in the other direction, the drumline is just flying through at 100 miles an hour, full out. It's such a great moment. Since we're talking visual, did you guys write down any other visual moments that you particularly thought were memorable?
I personally thought the very end of the show, when the whole horn, they pushed the whole horn line and battery out to the end zone and the back and clear the entire field. So you think at the end of a show, you know, you want to be company front to the push to the front, you know, at least at that time. And they did the opposite. And so then all of a sudden it opened that floor up almost like a winter guard show, and the color guard could do their thing. And the male and the female were lifted up, and then they fell back and then circled around. And, you know, it was that right there was a really, really cool moment, because this show had been so aggressive up to that point. And then all of a sudden they decided, hey, let's twist it. And the last 30, 40 seconds of the show, we're going to end down. I thought that was smart. I thought that was fun. I thought that was really interesting that they chose to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all those aggressive in your face moments, and they end empty. It's amazing. The use of the space with all that music stuff too, I think is just amazing. With the heartbeat stuff at the beginning, the heartbeat stuff at the end, and all that like heavy percussion stuff at the end, but it still has all that space, that like cha jun 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 jun, all the front ensemble playing in the timpani solo, and it's just all this like incredible space through that ending, because that's the same spot I think, like the evolution into the heart, and then the way that the heart dissipates into the perimeter of the field. It's just musically and visually, it's exquisite.
For sure. The ending definitely sticks out to me. There's a few other moments around there that stick out, but just more of like they're engaging moments. Nothing that I'm thinking that stuck out to me is like, wow, that was very intricate drill wise. But I did remember, and I watched it again here recently, the total energy that the show brought from top to bottom, and how everything was always in the right place at the right time. The spread that they would get from end zone to end zone while they were playing stuff was always impressive. And then, of course, going back and looking at it, just mad respect at the drum break, and then having the brass, how far they were behind them playing all the stabs and part of the things over top of the drum break, which is that kind of distance, because you never ever put the drums in front of the ensemble when you're trying to play that kind of stuff. And they definitely went after it and achieved it. It was great.
One other thing that really was interesting to me visually is all the couple work that they had the color guard doing the entire show.
Right.
From top to bottom, there were every opportunity. There was all this couple work, just, really driving home a whole love thing, just every opportunity they had. And it wasn't always male, female. Sometimes it was female, female, sometimes male, male. Just the way they interacted with each other and, like I said, produced that couple work all the way through. And they never pushed it to the vulgar standpoint. It was always very sexy. It was always very sultry, but it was never distasteful. And I really appreciate. And I love the fact that they used the couple work as much as they did every opportunity, even if it was just a simple putting a flag on somebody's back and rolling over it and off they went. There was always these little moments, little vignettes of couple work everywhere. I thought that was really impressive.
Yeah, that's a great point. So since we're talking about this color guard for a moment, most rewatchable color guard moment, we've sort of mentioned a lot of color guard moments. I want to go back to something Noah said first, which was they open with all these sabers, and I agree with you. Noah had written down, it reminded me of San Jose Raiders the year before, 93. They did Bolero. It was all saber. It was really innovative and groundbreaking. And I felt like they brought that, obviously that was Scott Chandler as well. They brought that to this sort of opening, the way they looked, the way they were moving with the sabers. Of course, it was perfectly in keeping with the Spanish show, but I thought that was like really like set the tone for the guard show in a way that I thought was really smart and really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, and it's the costuming too.
Right.
The costuming is very similar to that as well, and obviously just the subject matter. But going back to what Don said with the pairs, like it's always hard, but if some of those overheads, if you find the video, if you can start watching the guard more than the horn line and stuff through those, they do it so often. They do it so often that when you just watch for it, you never realize the pair stuff all the time. Some of it's super overt, but some of it's just a layer too. And it's amazing. And that if you look for it, you see all these spots for it. And it's just so smart.
For sure. And I think they really captured, of course, they've got their big block spin and flag type stuff, but they really take a lot of moments and capture that cinematic appeal in certain things that really kind of drive the average audience member kind of into the show more so than maybe some other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and the guard really is the storytellers through the whole show. I mean, they're the horns are marching beautifully and playing amazingly, and they're the soundtrack, like you said, like from a cinematic approach, and the guard is the storytellers, and it's the choices they make do that so well in the show. And I think more so than some other years, it's just, again, it's so accessible. Like my parents watch the show and they love the show, and they don't understand other people's shows, but they love the show. There was just something about it that was so accessible, but also so enthralling and captivating and good. The quality was so good.
You know, I actually want to ask you about that because I've had some drum corps fans sort of dismiss this show for that very reason. Like somehow the fact that it's so accessible and that it's so like such a clear Spanish show. I've actually had some people sort of poo-poo it. Like, oh, that's everyone's favorite show. You know, like it's I don't know. Has anybody else? Seriously, I had this happen. Has anybody else experienced this phenomenon of people sort of discounting it because it was so successful or it seemed so accessible?
I haven't heard one soul say anything negative about that show. That's not saying they're not out there. I mean, there's naysayers out there everywhere, but we'll call them haters. But no, I don't. I've never heard anybody. But these guys might have.
Well, that's good if you haven't. I don't mean to assume that there's thousands of them out there. I just had that encounter with someone one time.
I could maybe. I mean, I honestly, that's the first I've ever heard of that, man.
We can let that move. We can just move that on. I'm sure that was an outlier, but I just remember I was so fascinated by it because I thought, how can you not love this show? But I think this person thought it was just, you know, they were above it.
Well, you know, man, I think some drum corps nowadays might take some notes from this just to get a little more connected back to the audience a little bit more.
No kidding.
And sometimes, basically, for the soundtrack side of things, you know, I think they did a really good job in the show of like, our show's about this. This is what the music sounds like. And not a lot of shows nowadays have that same kind of connection. So, I mean, they did something right.
Well, yeah, and it also, I don't know. Again, thinking in context, it comes right after like the Star 93 thing, you know, which is the least accessible show. Like it was so artistic. And people love that, you know, and people think that should have won and that's the best show ever and that's whatever. And they argue that. And then Blue Devils win the next year with this, which is accessible and not Star 93 at all, you know. I don't know. Maybe that's a reason why people would see.
Yeah. Because like everybody thought everybody was on that A train of like, let's be just like,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think that the historical significance of this show, especially for the Blue Devils, is just astonishing to me. Like, this was such a seismic shift, I think, in the Blue Devils. And I loved the Blue Devils before this, too, you know? But it was like, this just felt so different. And you look, if you look at that show, there's not a huge difference in the look of that drum corps today as in this show, you know? I mean, the uniform is close to what it was in that, you know? The way they move. And I just remember sitting there Saturday night and if you were there, there's that, people talk about it, but it's true. There was like that, like almost fog in the stadium that night. And I remember seeing them come out on the field in that like misty fog. And it was like, that blue was unlike anything I'd ever seen in my life. Like I have never seen a color that looked like that ever. And I don't know why. It was just something about, and I'll never forget that. And it's that became the Blue Devils to me, you know, like, and I think to a lot of people, there's a fan base that it
started in '94. Yeah. For me.
And that was the year, you know, whether you think that's one of the greatest shows ever. I mean, that's always arguable, but man, is it historically significant for the activity and for that drum corps for sure. I think. Yeah.
I feel like people looked into the future about 10 years on a lot of things, and then, you know, some things kind of evolved into what that was maybe. But it's definitely a seismic shift, I think, in Blue Devils and the activity. I think as far as how people were putting together shows and how people were presenting the shows also was a big change, I think, when this came out. I mean, it was undeniable for me, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that show several times that summer, and I remember the very first time I saw that corps in the parking lot after warm-up coming to the stadium. It was, like you said, that Blue Devil blue was just so vibrant. It was electric. And then they had the way the sequins were laid out. It didn't matter if their horns were down to their side or up to their mouth. It all connected to that silver. So the whole thing just had a buzz about it, and then they had the feathers weren't just black. They were like that greenish kind of black. So it was just the ultimate sophistication, and I think that was one of the first year that, like, during the lot sequence when they were doing warm-ups, they had those little short that they still use, those little short black shirts underneath, so you didn't see the bibbers, and it just had that, I don't know, it had that professionalism about it in the parking lot. Once they suited up, it just had this sophistication that I'm not so sure. I know that corps did not have it before. It was a different type of aura with the tux jackets. It was a different type of thing. This was like the next new step of, oh crap, look at these guys. And you knew just from looking at them before they played a note or marched a step or threw a toss, you knew it was going to be amazing just because of how they looked, and I think Michael designed that uniform, and, it was a good mix of old, but stepping into the future with the new. And yeah, the whole thing was just over the top sophistication.
Wow. Great points. Okay. So we haven't talked horn line. Does anybody have a favorite horn line moment?
I do. Right towards the end of the opener, they're in like an S curve, and man, they are playing their cans off, and they just keep this S curve coming, pushing to the front, and it's all this intermingling of lines between the different sections, and it was just so powerful and ultra clean for being right there and being in that S curve and being so loud. That's probably one of the most impressive things. It was just like one of their blow-away moments, with just big, wide-open jazz, just Blue Devils jazz, blowing you away, pushing towards the front of the field on that big S curve. Yeah, that was a moment that still gives me chills when I look at it, when I watch it.
Yeah, I'm just impressed with the general stamina and technicality that they're able to kind of play with just throughout. There's a lot of people still nowadays they have those moments in the show where they can really kind of articulate some things and like spend a lot of time during the summer working out. And I feel like Blue Devils just had that throughout the show, and it was just part of the context of it. And for me, it's really hard to pick one moment, but just to know just how incredible it was and how it was put together. And yeah, as a fan, like I said, it was pretty undeniable.
I think the soloists Blue Devil's always been so known for their soloists. And I just remember thinking the soloists were so amazing that year. I mean, the ensemble was beyond, but the two spots for me, and it may be the same spot you're talking about, Don, but there's that one, I don't know if it's the opener or the second move. I don't know how they broke them up. But the one where it like ends on the and beat, the drums are going cha 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 cha, and it ends like on that and beat, and the horn, the mellophone, and they're playing like the siren thing, and they're just flying, and it's just so in your face, and then they don't go to the downbeat. Like that was one of those that was just like takes your breath away. And then for me, it was the just insane intonation of the trumpet trio thing at the end where they're playing this yeah. That guy goes up to that high G, and it is like the most in tune on those ratty bugles that we all played back then. And he slays that note like perfectly in tune. And the corps comes in behind that, just killing it from there to the end. It's amazing to me. And it's so simple. It's just like it's an exercise. It's just an arpeggio, but it's like the way it's all just put together, and it brings home that ending. It's just like you can't stay sitting down when that happens. It's awesome.
I think we're in trouble now because we just made the point that G bugles could sound wonderful in tune, and gosh, I don't know if we want to go there, guys. I mean, we're gonna.
Hey, you know what? You can always edit that out. Doesn't even see the light of day.
Are you kidding? Not on your life. I'm sure I'll be getting letters. Tim at marchingroundtable.com. Anyway, I would like to know what people think about. No, I'm not gonna. Let's not hang on that. But I do want to say, I think I have a lot of the same. I think, Don, I might have written down the same place. Like in the middle of Night Streets, about 3 minutes into the show, there's just this lick that's just so incredibly technical. And the thing is, they stop and play it for a minute, and then they play it on the move. And of course, they're playing a lot of ridiculous stuff on the move on this show, which is something I sort of noticed. And I don't want to again open a second can of worms so quickly, but like there wasn't a lot of stop and play the hard stuff. It was like we're going to march our butt off and play all this hard stuff, and I just loved seeing that. Like that made me nostalgic too, I have to say.
Right. To me, I think that's what provided the overall energy.
Yeah.
That they weren't standing still. They were moving and playing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which it just brought just way different energy than anybody else. You know, again, undeniable physicality. You know, kind of unmatched playing and moving. I mean, just. The listening responsibilities when you move that much while you're playing that much, just, yeah, it's a lot.
So let's talk about favorite drumline moment. I assumed that that's where we were going to start this discussion, so I'm fascinated that we're this far in and we haven't really. Now, we talked a lot about the monkey drumming thing, which is clearly iconic. Did anybody else jot down a certain moment that you wanted to highlight for the drumline?
There was a couple for me. I think I mentioned the initial intro, even though it was in the drumline percussion section or whatever, the fact that they were able to create that vibe acoustically without sound design and just really fill up the stadium and create that immersive soundtrack to get everybody plugged into the show. Before we even started playing anything, or they started playing anything, you could really buy into it, you know, edge of the seat waiting for something. So I thought that was pretty unique, and the fact they were able to achieve that edge of the seat satisfaction, you know, with some gong scrapes and some other stuff, and echoing trumpet stuff in the beginning and that kind of thing. The other thing is they had a lot of course, the monkey drumming for effect and things like that, but they had a lot of really cool, intricate stuff in between the horn stabs and things like that during the percussion break. They tried different implements. I know they had like this plastic kind of like head that they put on the snare, drum, and they were able to play a kind of a musical feature with it. They pulled it off and threw it so you could see that, hey, we played on something different. I don't even know what it was to this day, but it was like a clear piece of plexiglass that changed the timbre of it, so you weren't hearing just a loud snare drum. So I thought that was kind of cool. They had during the drum break, they had this split 16th note thing between the upper battery and the basses that they were playing, where the basses were splitting the E's and U's, and the upper battery was on the downbeats and upbeats, and it was pretty quick, and they played it consistently every time I saw them over the summer. And even when I watched the video you sent me again, Tim, like I was surprised again, like, wow, that was pretty awesome. The fact that people were trying that back then, because you just don't do that stuff nowadays, and I thought it was really cool. But
wait, why don't we do this anymore? It's too exposed, too risky? What am I missing?
Man, there's a lot of things a lot of people ain't going to be doing anymore, and they move them judges. So,
okay, fair enough.
That's a whole nother podcast. So just
more worms in cans. Okay.
Yeah, on that one. But
I guess I prodded you on that. That's my fault. I'll take the lead on that.
No, I think competition breeds.
I'm sorry, I'm cracking myself up here. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
For sure. I think competition and rules breeds different design realms, right? Sure. And I think back then they were able to kind of let some things go, and not necessarily concerned about the risk and things. But that was a different time. People were coming out of some different kind of drum corps, and there was a lot of boundaries being broken then. So who knows? I just know a lot of people think about risk a lot differently nowadays. That's all.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
What impressed me most about that drum line is just how hard they hit. They played those drums. They didn't feather tap at all. When they played the drum, they played the drum. Now, granted, yes, that horn line's loud, and I know from a balance standpoint they probably needed to at some time, but that in itself, that aggressiveness was part of the effect of what that drum line was throughout the whole show. Even the quote down moments, it was still a very aggressive sound. So yeah, that's what impressed me the most. Like Noah was saying earlier, where they did that big wide open roll. Man, they were playing at their eyeballs, and then they ended it with a double shot. Not just a release, but a release, and then bam, let me smack you one last time. And at the end of the opener, they're playing so much and so hard and running up to the front sideline all at the same time. So that was just the aggressiveness of that group was totally different than what they had been the past several years. They were very reserved and really, really clean, but not just roar aggressive, and this was the first year for that. And of course, that's when Scott came back. So I think that was something that he kind of started a little bit at Vanguard when he was there. But then when he came back to Blue Devils, it was just pushed it over the edge. And I think that's what made them so exciting to watch.
Well, I'm not a drummer, so this is a hard one for me to answer. But what I will tell you is that there was something about the writing in this show that as a non-drummer, I knew every single drum part to the show. Like I could sing I knew where the rolls were, I knew where the hits were, because a lot of it was written so harmoniously with the hornline stuff, like it was just so perfectly put together. And so as a non-drummer, it says something, I think, about the composition of what was happening in the show, that I could sing all the drum parts and I knew where they went and I knew where they were. And I couldn't do that with Phantom Regiment's show and other people's shows. Like it didn't occur to me to care about that as much, and there was something about this as a total package that if you knew the horn line parts, then you knew the drum line parts too. Like it was just, they went together.
Snug in a rug, man.
Right.
I jotted down the plastic thing I thought was really cool. And I assumed it was during day dance. I assumed that was sort of like the whole flamenco dancer sound effect. Isn't that what they were going for? I assume, right?
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what they've told me what it was.
Yeah, that's what I assumed because it did. It changed the timbre to be like that. It's what it sounded like. It sounded like that flamenco.
Yeah, on wood. She was on a wood stage.
Yeah. It was really clever. Yeah, I liked that. And I clearly know I'm not a drummer, but I thought that was cool. It worked. Made sense to me. Okay, so you guys ready to shift gears to talk about if this show was produced today?
We continue our discussion, including considering how this show might be different if produced today, after this short sponsor message.
This podcast is sponsored by FJM, Fred J. Miller Incorporated, found at fjminc.com. FJM is one of the leaders in uniforms for marching groups, drum lines, color guards, and concert dress and choirs. This includes the FJM Cesario collection. At the recent BOA finals, 9 out of the top 12 bands were performing in FJM uniforms, including the top 5 bands. FJM also provides all kinds of accessories for marching groups, as well as flags and guard equipment. Find out more at fjminc.com. That's fjminc.com. Fred J. Miller Incorporated, the company that changed everything. So you guys ready to shift gears to talk about if this show was produced today? Anything else you want to say before we do that?
Oh, no.
Okay, so let's so we don't have to talk about this too much, but I think it's interesting. Like we've already alluded to this a little bit, but like if somebody was going to take My Spanish Heart and put it on the field in 2020, like this is interesting to me. Like how would it be different? What would they do differently? How would it be produced differently? What do you think?
A lot more staging and a lot less drill.
Yeah. This is still that time period where and it's deep in that time period, but there's drill constantly in there, There's no pods. There's no running to pods and playing the mellophone lick or whatever it is. They're moving the whole time, which is awesome. Like what Shane was saying earlier, like there's no electronics in that show. So we have that lack of electronics, which are so heavy today. We have a lack of props, which are so prevalent today. Can't imagine doing a show today without prop,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would imagine there would be a lot more things. Props, less drill, more staging, more theatrics in the color guard. You name it. There's going to be more, but I mean, I think Blue Devils are the only ones that could do it again.
Really? Why do you think that?
Just because of style of music. I think nowadays, a lot of drum corps they're varying their tradition up. They're not, being stuck in their roots, per se, as much as they probably were 10 years ago. So I think a lot of drum corps could probably try it, but I think that the Blue Devils, has that flavor and vibe and edge to it that would be hard to beat, and you would always be compared to the best. So it's better to have the best repeat the best.
Interesting. Don or Noah, you guys want to weigh in on which corps you think could pull this off in 2020?
Today's corps, maybe Bluecoats with their kind of a jazzy feel. I think they could potentially do it. I think they could possibly one of the only ones that I would bet on that could pull it off, just because of the stylistic nature of the winds, what the brass is doing.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I would love to hear Doug Thrower do something with My Spanish Heart. I think that would be really, really interesting. Doug, are you listening?
Yeah, Blue Devils, of course, could do it again in a heartbeat. Put-em.
Wow.
For Spanish Heartbeat.
Nice. So you actually think they could? I mean, clearly they could.
It's just interesting to talk about if that show was done today. Because, back then, the color guard still had drill. They were still in forms with the corps, which very rarely happens nowadays.
Well, no, I do think that's really interesting because that may be the thing that would be the most different, is perhaps the way the guard is staged and approaches their role. Do you think that's true, Don?
Oh, yes, for sure. Because now, it's the color guard is so segmented most of the time and so multi-focused. And, back in the 90s, if you had two focal points for the color guard, the flags that usually surrounded the corps or, some type of shape within the corps, and then maybe another little pocket of rifles, maybe 8 or 10 rifles, and then the rifles would go off and they pick up flags. There was never really a whole lot of multi-focused. Most everything was very unison, or, there was maybe a secondary focus, but that was really it. Nowadays, it's, things are so multi-focused. Sometimes they're out of focus, because they're so multi-focused. So,
wow. You're preaching to the choir here, but
yeah, so that's so different. If you were talking about if that show were done again today,
right?
I think that would be the biggest thing that would be different, is the color guard, no doubt.
Noah, you want to weigh in on that? Do you think that would be more different than the horn staging?
I do. I think the use of the guard would probably be different. We said it earlier. I think that there would be less horn drill. You look at how much choreography is the horn line doing in this show? Like none, maybe. There's really not even like a foot spread. There's like nothing. So you think about that contribution and how differently everything would have to be set up to get that compulsory and to get some of those things off the lists that seem to be on there. As far as simultaneous responsibilities and all of the hornline body that's absent here. The awesome thing about it, though, is when I watch the show, I don't even think about that until you think about it. I don't watch it and think, wow, it's like.
No, but that's a great point. Like they're standing there playing this giant lick, and I'm not thinking, "Oh man, I wish they would do some lower body." Like, who cares?
Right. That's excellence. Excellence as an effect. It's like they play it so well that that's the effect. It's amazing, and you don't need all the other stuff, or at least they didn't. There's a mix, I think, in here of that guard of their staged moments in there. They create these stages for them, and then they've staged the guard in things. But there's also some of those great big sets that they're going through that are really curvilinear, and the guard is curvilinear with them, and they're part of the hornline drill, and you see that, which is still, just where they are in the era of drum corps at that point. You look the year before at 93 cadets, and that's all over the place. The guard is fully part of the drill through that. But you see Scott starting to get away from that a little bit here and staging some of the guard moments, especially in these moments like the beginning and the end and things like that.
Well, we talked about the number of times he took the liberty to pull a pair out, do something that was pretty different, right? That was pretty innovative in '94 for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, it was all drill. I mean, you were always with 15 of your other friends or more.
And this is we're starting to see like a production, I think.
Right. And also, I think if we think about what Winter Guard was at the time and how some of those designers were utilizing that, that arena to kind of create their own ideas and things like that. And aside from drum corps, I mean, I know Blue Devils clearly had an avenue of Winter Guard, right, where they had an outlet, right, they had Winter Guard at the time. So I'm pretty sure that a lot of that elements were able to introduce itself into the drum corps side of things because they were able to kind of experiment with it on the WGI side of things. So, I mean, I think the color guard would definitely be designed differently nowadays. I mean, especially the way WGI has changed really how a lot of things are done as far as like what's approachable and what's acceptable in DCI and design wise. And I think a lot of that started in 94 with Blue Devils, with the color guard staging being different from what it was, the groups in years prior. They're able to do some of that organic staging type things, cinematic looks where people can look and be, a character and be immersive into it and have it right. But yeah, I mean, nowadays between the brass and the rest of the drum corps and the color guard, things are more approached organically as a whole, like image, what we want to look like from end zone to end zone versus, all right, let's write some drill. Let's figure out where the color guard fits in the negative space and yada, yada. I think it's more thoughtful nowadays, I think, about the placement of things. But
the other thing we've talked about, like props, we've talked about all that stuff too. Like the costuming would be different too. Now, if the Blue Devils did the show today, I don't think the costuming would be any different, which is kind of cool. But if the Bluecoats did this show now, like you said, they could, Don, and they could think about like what would they be wearing? Because I think it wouldn't be a band uniform. Like I don't know. It's just interesting to think about.
Definitely interesting to think about. What about drum book? Do we want to talk about how that would be different in 2020? We've talked a lot about the drums and how aggressive and powerful they were.
I think stylistically, I mean, it's very similar to a lot of what's going on right now. A lot of people have a lot of different approaches, how they want to, people want to talk about how they approach the drum and the touch on the drum and how they hold the sticks and the weight of the arm into the head. It's more sciencey, I think, than maybe what it was back then. I don't know. But it doesn't seem like it's evolved that much, as far as the approach, because everybody does their own thing differently. You can walk up to any drum corps and the approach is their approach. And the only thing that makes it unique is the fact that they're all doing it the same, and that's what creates that identity. And Blue Devil's approach has even changed over the years, but it's still drumming, we drum still some of the same stuff they did then. And I think the phrasing's a little bit different now. I think about how people want to be exposed and the risk factor, right? So basically people are trying to triage their decisions on should I play this here or there, or should I wait till I get up beside the front ensemble and really kind of whip it out there. That's what people are having to think about now as far as like the drum book and the phrasing and things like that. They're not going to take that kind of ensemble risk to punctuate things and do the stuff that I think that they did in 94. Plus, of course, you've got the front ensemble arranging, to me, has changed the most as far as the percussion, battery or front. I think that's changed the most and has impacted drum corps more so than battery writing. Is that front ensemble just way better writing, better instruments, sound design. I mean, you name it. Like, that part of the drum corps has evolved tenfold, I think, in just even the past 10 years, much less 25 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%. The front ensemble stuff has changed so much. I mean, if you listen to this show and others, you know, the mallet instruments almost feel like tinker toys, because to be able to hear them, you have to play with rock hard mallets, and then you have to write everything the exact same. So it's everybody playing the same line with hard mallets, you know, and it's just, like I said, it's almost tinker toy sounding. And now it's more of a true percussion ensemble. So the writing is a little bit different now that we can mic things. You can use softer mallets or different articulation in mallets. The writing is clearer. You can write multi lines because you can hear them. The electronica now, of course, that's added is just a whole different layer. So yeah, the front ensemble stuff is taking a huge leap.
Yeah, and if let's just say this show was written exactly the same with the battery and brass, you know what I'm saying? And then it was written exactly the same thing today, and then the only thing that changed was the front ensemble, it would be a different show. Just because of just the nature of what the front ensemble can provide versus what they were able to back then. But while there's not much of change in instrumentation of the brass stuff or battery, there's still a snare drum, a quads, and 5 basses. You know, I mean, it ain't changed. Some of the vocabulary's changed, how it's approached has changed, but I think people are still hard pressed to get the kind of effect Blue Devils got then. You know, like, forget just the musical phrasing. You know, everybody does that, but just like, how do you capture the Johnny Drumstick moments, you know, in one show, with that many of them in one show? How do you do that? And they did. So,
well, and I guess that's why we're talking about it. Like you said, 25 years later, here we are talking about it, because so much of it worked. So much of it was so well done, so well performed. It's an iconic show. All right. Well, this has been a great discussion. I've had super fun. Congrats to everybody in the Blue Devils that was a performer or a designer or an instructor or, you know, fed the guys cornflakes, whatever you did, man. We appreciate it because we all love.
No, they were Wheaties. They were Wheaties. It definitely wasn't cornflakes.
Good point. Good, all right, the Wheaties. Yeah, but whatever they were feeding them, man, I'm sure they're still feeding them because it's still working. But no, what a fantastic show. So I'm going to let each of you have a final thought about Blue Devils 94 or this discussion. Don, I'll let you go first, man. Any final thing you want to say about this whole thing?
No, I just, like I said before, I just think this show was activity changing, and there's some really good videos out there of even the performers in the parking lot doing their thing, and it's just as much fun as what you see on the field. So I'd highly recommend people going out there and find those because it's a treat just watching them, you know, get ready to perform this show. That's even more exciting at times. But yeah, I love this show. Loved it first time I saw it. I still love it today. So congrats to everybody involved. It's awesome.
Very good. Noah, final thoughts from you.
Well, I so distinctly remember sitting there. I was just thinking, I mean, it's 25 years ago now. Like, it's crazy to me. And to think, like, me sitting there, like, 25 years later, I would be talking about this show with a panel of, like, amazing people. It's just crazy how things happen. And how the show is, the testament of it is that it has stood the test of time like this, I think, you know, and it's, like Don, like Shane too, it's shows like this, I consider myself lucky to have been able to see it live, and to have been able to live it. Like that was it's so amazing. And there's a lot of shows from that era that I love so much, but I think few of them have had as much impact on me. And I have as fond of memories of as this show. Like it's just amazing. And you also look at that team that put that show together is still the same team, like that's another testament of what's happening, because you don't see that any place else in drum corps. That's shocking, amazing, and awesome, and why they're so good now still. It's amazing. It's a beautiful thing. It's a work of art, and it changed the activity. It changed that organization. It created a fan base, and it stands up still. It's awesome.
Yeah, great point. Shane, man, you're the man of the hour. Thank you for putting this panel together and choosing this show. This has been super fun. Thank you for making this happen. What do you want to say in your final thoughts?
Again, when you asked me what show, talking about this project, what show would I want to do? Like, there was no other show. It was like BD 94, boom, done. And it had, and I thought about Don immediately, and I thought about Noah because I know it inspired both of us. I knew Don because he was my mentor, and I knew he had marched there. But the biggest thing is like, it was inspiring to me. And when I was auditioning for Mystique at the time in 95, we were auditioning kind of around the fall of 94. That summer had just ended, and we're hanging out at Don's house, and Don always had the warm-up video was always around there. So just being able to, just that environment, the beginning of Mystique to me smelled of Blue Devils 94, and it was a good time for me to be introduced to the activity. And it's really just the foundation of my inspiration for kind of what I do now. I think for around that time was pretty rocking. So the vibe was awesome, and the end game was clear cut to me. This is, like Noah said, we're all sitting here talking about this. I think shows like that impact every generation of people. There's shows nowadays that somebody's going to be talking about 25 years from now.
Right.
It was really incredible. This for me, and yada yada. But yeah, I mean, it was for me at that place in time. It was inspiring for many reasons, and kudos to everybody involved. Thank you.
That's a great point. Like, is there anything better than to imagine that you could create something that would impact someone's life completely, maybe inspire them to do that kind of work, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's amazing. So hats off to them. Shane, Don, Noah, you guys were all wonderful. Thank you so much for talking with me and taking time to do this tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Tim.
If you'd like to talk about one of your favorite shows on DCI Rewatch, contact Tim at marchingroundtable.com. Just choose a show and a couple of friends to join you. It can be any show, any corps, any year. Just choose a show you weren't involved with in any way, and let us know what you think about this discussion. Do you agree with the opinions of our panel? Join the discussion on the Marching Roundtable Facebook group page. And don't miss WGI Rewatch podcasts, presented by the Marching Roundtable.
If you're a fan of the Marching Roundtable, please tell a friend or colleague about us. Consider writing a review on iTunes. Or better yet, become a member. For as little as $2 a month, you can get access to every podcast release and help us keep creating and sharing this great information. Go to marchingroundtable.com and click on Podcast Membership. Thanks again to the sponsor of this podcast, Fred J. Miller Incorporated, found at fjminc.com. This is your host, Tim Hinton, the beast of the marching arts. Hear my marching band show arrangements at timhinton.com.
If you're a business that works with band directors, marching bands, color guards, or drum lines, you should sponsor podcasts at the Marching Roundtable. Our listeners are the exact audience you're trying to reach, and with thousands of podcast downloads each month, it's a great way to directly reach your target audience. For more information, click on the sponsorship opportunities link at marchingroundtable.com or email Tim at marchingroundtable.com. You can grow your business and help support what we're doing here on the podcast.